been given the all aboard by the conductor? That means we can get out of here. Still flying Key West. Now there is something pretty neat about being on this different tour. You guys are on the 1 hour tour. We used to be able to go by the Deepwater Harbor, by the half shell. And the only time we're able to do it now is when you're on board. So we're going to do a little U-turn over here by the half shell raw bar. We are going to pass this way again. Ahead of us is the natural Deepwater Harbor of Key West. It runs the whole length of this side of the island. We're going to talk more about it. But I want you to keep that in your memory. The natural Deepwater Harbor of Key West. We are going to do a little U in the half shell raw bar parking lot and head out.
Sorry.
I heard a young woman asking the conductor why we don't pull up over there, because we can get in there over by the catamaran, but there's no way that we can do a roundabout and get out. We can't back this up because you can't back up a 60-foot articulated vessel. It just collapses on itself. This restaurant here on the right that says Turtle Crawls was the old Turtle Crawls, and that's a old word that means corral. That's where they used to bring in the live turtles. We had the largest turtle factory on the island of Key West. We supplied more turtle soup and steak to anyone, to everyone, than any other city on the planet. Of course, they stopped that practice in 1971 when turtles became on the endangered list, species list. I'm glad they did. When I was growing up and they were cooking turtles at that factory, the smell would knock you out of your bed at night if the wind was blowing in the right direction. You know, it is disgusting. But you've never had turtle steak, have you? Wow. I hate to admit it, but it's really good. It may seem warm today, but you might be surprised to know that we've never recorded a 100-degree temperature on the island of Key West. 97 is the record high because the island mass is not large enough, and during the summer months that are coming up right now, you can feel the breeze coming in off the Atlantic. They call those the trade winds, and they keep the temperature down. Now, you can feel the humidity. Don't get me wrong, the humidity will make it feel like 120 on the island, but 97 is the record high. And if you're curious about what the lowest temperature ever recorded in Key West has been, it's 41 degrees. We're the only frost-free region in the continental United States. Now you happen to get a tour driver. Like I said, I was born on this island. That's what they call us conchs. But I also love trees and birds. So you're going to get the whole tour. But when I see interesting plants in flower, and there's a lot of them right now, I kind of like to point them out. You're going to see a lot of bougainvillea in color right now. I say color and not bloom because the color you see on the bougainvillea vines, and I'll point them out, are not actual flowers. They're just new growth leaves that come in all different colors, and they turn green as they mature. All the bougainvillea flowers are little white dots in the middle of that color. I'll show you what I mean. There's some beautiful magenta color coming up on the left. You see a little white dot in the middle of that color, that's the actual flower. The color you're looking at are new growth leaves. You guys ever heard of Chanel No. 5? Because right now all the frangipani are in bloom. They come in white, yellow, and red. And there's some beautiful yellow frangipani coming up on the left. In Hawaii, you'll hear these called plumeria. That's the family. That's where Chanel No. 5 is made from, the oil essence of those flowers. They're not native to Key West. They were brought by the Spanish and the English, planted them here. Now, if you guys are feeling a little dizzy right now, it's not because of the heat. It's because we're climbing the highest mountain on the island, and the air is really thin up here. When we get up to the top of the mountain, if you're afraid of heights, Jake, I don't know if you're afraid of heights, but don't look down to the right because it's really scary right about now. Folks, that's Solaris Hill. That's our highest natural point at 18 feet 6 inches above sea level. It's actually a ridge that runs the center part of the island, and my grandmother's house, where I own now, is on that ridge, so I'm really fortunate. The old Stone Methodist Church here on the left, built in 1877. You might notice that the plexiglass covering the stained glass on that church. When we get up to St. Paul's Episcopal up here on the left, we do the same thing. Some of the stained glass on both these churches is actually Tiffany made. It can't be replaced. It's very old. The reason they cover the plexiglass on the outside, well, you can imagine what a coconut going 70 miles an hour in a hurricane would do to stained glass. Well, the same thing it would do to you. So that's why they cover. Here's the St. Paul's Church on the left. They do the same thing with the stained glass. This church property goes back to 1839. It's the oldest non-Roman Catholic church in Florida. I'm not a member of that church, but the pastor's a real good friend of mine. If you go inside St. Paul's, you'll notice that the high vaulted ceiling looks like an upside down ship. It was built by ship's carpenters who had no idea how to build a high vaulted ceiling. So they just built a big upside down boat and hoisted it up into place. I'm going to turn left here onto Whitehead Street. I want you to notice the Key West Post Office on your right. You might be thinking, big deal. Well, it's the only one we have. We're proud of it. And it was designed by an architect named Sonny McCoy. Sonny McCoy was a 2-term mayor in Key West back in the 70s, and he's also in the Guinness Book of World Records because our mayor water skied nonstop from Key West to Havana Harbor in 1976. 6 hours and 14 minutes. Put him in the Guinness Book. Doing it without Castro's permission put him in a Cuban jail when he got there. They sent him back on a diplomatic plane when they worked out who he was. Coming up on the right is the beginning of U.S. Highway 1 North, mile marker 0. See this? It ends 2,209 miles away in Fort Kent, Maine. That mile marker 0 is the most stolen sign in the state of Florida, disappearing about 12 times a year. Most of it during spring break. We lost 3 this year. I've been here 62 years, and I've got 2 of them. And I happen to know for a fact it takes a 9/16 wrench if you're interested. These are all of our county municipal buildings here on the right. Now you notice a lot of chickens, so let's go ahead and get the chickens out of the way. The chickens are all over the island. These are not domestic birds. These are wild birds. Latin name is Gallus gallus, or the Indonesian jungle fowl, and they have been on this island for over 500 years. It's one of the things the Spanish left when they first got to this island in 1513. And being considered a wild bird of the wing, they're protected by state and federal law. But we love our chickens. They will eat their weight every month in insects, cockroaches, and one of their favorite things to eat, they love the scorpion. And they keep that population way down for us. We do have scorpions on the island. They are not deadly, like a bee sting, but they are inconvenient if you step on one. You will not see one unless you go digging in some garbage, leaves, debris, or something like that. They pretty much stay to themselves, covered up. Sandy Cornish was a slave. He bought his way to freedom in Maryland in 1850 and made his way to the Keys. Became a very prosperous businessman on this island. I want you to remember that Key West was a Union city in the Confederate state of Florida during that war. And at the end of the Civil War in 1865, Sandy built the first African-American church on the island, and it is still the oldest long-standing active church. It's coming up on the right. It's called the AME Zion. The stained glass above the front doors at the top are called the Eye of God. It's a beautiful church. It's one of my favorites. I've read Sandy's will, and in his will he wrote Never closed the doors on my churches. The will is still in our library. You might have noticed the doors are closed now, but if you walk up those front steps, you'll notice that the doors of that church are built without locks. That church is never locked, ever. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So in other words, the doors of his church are never closed. Now we only passed Hemingway's house once on this tour, and it's coming up on the left-hand side on the next block behind a red brick wall. The house was built in 1851 by a wrecker captain named Agent Tift. The Hemingways, his second wife Pauline and he, moved in here in 1931. They lived there for almost 10 years. The house is called Spanish Colonial Design, and it's the only design like that on the island. The house is actually built from Holmes coral stone that was quarried from that very site. The house was built on top of the hole it created. It's the only house on the island made. The Key West Lighthouse is here on the right. It's hard to see from this angle. The original lighthouse is built at the southernmost point, which is where we're headed right now. That lighthouse was destroyed in the hurricane of 1846. This lighthouse that you see was moved to this higher ground in 1847 and was still a working lighthouse until 1969. A reminder, you must stay in your seats at all times. If anybody stands, I have to stop. Coming up on the left, it's number 1007, that home. That's the most important house on the island. That's my home. Sorry. I had to point that out. I don't get to pass it that often on the train. Key West has a long history with the United States Navy. There's been a full-time naval presence on Key West since 1821. Commodore David Porter first brought his mosquito fleet here. They loved the natural Deepwater Harbor, and they came here to hunt the pirates in the Northern Caribbean and get them out of here, and they did a great job. Bless you. Key West is still home to the second largest Top Gun training facility 9 miles north of Boca Chica Naval Air Station. Key West is home to the Caribbean Task Force Command. The Key West Naval Intelligence Processing Training Facility is based here. Let's hear it for the Navy boys. I was raised in this annex with the Navy hands on the island. It's coming up on the right. It's a very secure gate. It is home to the Joint Caribbean Task Force Command, and it's also where our local SEAL detachment teaches other branches of service from all over the world how to hold their breath underwater and mine ships. No matter what you think of the U.S. Navy, those boys and girls got talent. We are approaching the southernmost point in the continental United States. This marker buoy dead ahead of us, and it's going to be on your right-hand side, is as far south as you can get in the continental U.S. without getting your feet wet. There's a lot of people taking pictures here, so I'm going to slow down, let you take as much picture as you can. Please don't go diving off the train at this point. This is where I lose a lot of people. It says 90 miles to Cuba on that buoy. That's actually a lie. It's 92, but 90 look better. You're 86 miles further south in Brownsville, Texas. At this point, I just want to let you know I'm here. These are the southernmost tourists, and we're the southernmost contract. I'll remind you guys again, if you're going to stand, I have to stop. Thank you. If you have a southernmost point, then of course you have to have a southernmost house. The mansion coming up on the right is called Queen Anne Architecture, and it is the southernmost mansion, and it was built by a judge named Binding Harris in 1899. It's the second most photographed house in the United States. I think number one they say is the White House, and this is number two. Judge Harris had a morbid fear of Seminole Indian attack. The walls at the base of that home are 12 feet thick. Have the Seminoles ever attacked Key West? Not even close. But the judge did hate those Indians. mentioned a while ago that we're celebrating 500 years, and we are. The first European man to set foot in Key West was, of course, the Spanish in 1513. When they got here, they found the same thing that you're looking at, without the houses and hotels, but the Spanish found bones on the island, a lot of bones, human bones. Now, indigenous Indians have been using the Florida Keys for centuries. They had names like Calusa, the Carib, the Metacombe, and the Bayahana, and even Tusquana. Seminoles were much later. We can't tell you whether the bones the Spanish found were part of a burial ground or a battleground. The only thing we know for certain is what the Spanish called the island. They did name it Bone Island. In Spanish language, that's Cayo Hueso. The name Key West is just a very poor translation of the words Cayo Hueso into English. Cayo does mean key or island. Hueso, spoken and written on maps, somebody thought it meant west. It seemed logical because of the way the islands swing toward the west. It just doesn't mean anything of the sort, and it stuck. Henry Morrison Flagler was a very rich man. He was the partner of John Rockefeller, and he built a string of hotels in Florida from St. Augustine all the way down to Dallas Crossroads. Today we call that Miami. And he connected them with a railroad he called the Florida East Coast Railroad System. He finished the railroad to Miami in 1896. Then he told his engineers a year later to take it to Key West. Well, it took a few years to design, but they started building the train from Miami to Key West in 1905. It took 7 years to do. He had to build 47 bridges over open water and swamp. One of those was 7 miles long. But in January of 1912, at a cost of 111 miles and $126 million of 1905 money, a train pulled into the island of Key West. Now, I've only got an hour to spend with you, and I can't explain to you the enormity of that. Because for the very first time in our history, this island was connected to the mainland. And true to form, when Flagler got here, he built a hotel. It's coming up ahead of us on the right. The largest hotel on the island that he built, called the Casa Marina, the house by the sea. It's made of imported German concrete that's impervious to salt water. The roof are handmade Cuban barrel tiles, and the lobby is lined with Key West mahogany wood. Today, it is run by the Waldorf Astoria of New York. This is the Casa Marina head. You guys came in on the Gulf of Mexico. If you look directly ahead of me, you see the Atlantic Ocean with a couple of white caps because there's a 20-knot wind blowing on it. But when we get up here, you might notice that, well, it's the Atlantic Ocean, but there's really no waves. And there's not. Because 7 miles directly ahead of us is the longest living coral reef in the Americas, and it breaks up the waves before they can get to Key West. Now those white caps are just from the wind. Before we built a system of channel markers, buoys, and lighthouses, that reef out there used to break up something else. Ships. Wooden ships, and a lot of them. When a wooden ship went aground off Key West coast, you'd hear this cry all over the island. You say it wreck ashore, and every man with a boat on this island would head for that reef. Now their first job was to save lives, and they saved thousands. Children, their next job was to make money. They made millions. The first man to the wreck was called the wrecking master and could receive up to 50% of whatever was salvaged from that vessel and brought back to the Key West ports. Now, everybody got a cut. Because of the wrecking industry, by 1856, Key West was the richest city in the United States per capita and remained that way for 11 straight years. Channel markers, buoys, and lighthouses made wrecking obsolete. The last wrecking case was 1921. The next day, wreck vessels on the reef became the providence of the U.S. Coast Guard. Still is. In 1865, 3 gunships out of Key West intercepted 3 slave ships on the way to Cuba. And 1,400 souls were brought back to Key West Island. 297 died. They were buried in a mass grave right here on the beach. Coming up on the right, you're going to see a memorial to those 4 souls. And a memorial marking the mass grave site. You'll see a sign that says African Cemetery at Higgs Beach. The survivors of those slave ships, well, their families are still here.
Right, exactly.
I'm a conch. I told you a while ago, it's what they call us if we're born on the island. This is a conch shell in my hand. You guys know what these are, right? It's a sea mollusk. This happens to be a species called the queen conch. We eat a lot of it, a whole lot. We pry it out of the shell and grind it up. We make conch fritters, conch chowder, and conch ceviche. We leave it whole, pound it thin, saute it, call it conch steak. Put a little key lime on it and serve it with black beans and rice. ¿Tú hablas español? Black beans and yellow rice is also known as frijoles negros and arroz amarillo. Say it. Never. Our high school football team are called the Key West High School Fighting Conchs. The girls' drill team are the Conchettes. The sidewalk over here on the left is even made with concrete. No, not really. But we are known as the Conch Republic, and that's not a joke. We got the name Conch Republic back in April of 1982. In that month, in that year, the U.S. government set up a border patrol station 90 miles north of Key West on Highway 1, stopping every car coming in and out of the Keys, looking for drugs and illegal aliens. But what they did was cause a 5-hour traffic jam on the only highway we have. Our mayor at the time, his name was Dennis Wardlow, still is, great guy. He begged them to take it down. They refused. So here's what we did. We sent a man to the federal court up in Miami and formally seceded from the United States of America. We took stale Cuban bread out to the Naval Air Station and threw it at the officers when they got off duty. Don't worry, they just picked it up and threw it back. But we attacked a naval installation. We lowered the American flag in front of that post office I showed you and raised our own. We were angry. But then, of course, we immediately re-raised the American flag, surrendered, and asked for $1 billion in foreign aid. We didn't get it. We knew we wouldn't. We were looking for publicity. We got it. We just didn't expect it to go worldwide, and it did. One newspaper in Paris picked it up and called it the Conch that Roared. The government got embarrassed and they took that border patrol station down. We have been celebrating ourselves as the Conch Republic ever since. We celebrate every April 23rd, a week long, and we just got to celebrate our 31st year. We have our own flag. We even have a motto. You ready? We seceded where others failed. Welcome to the Conch Republic. Cuban music, because this area when I was growing up was predominantly a Cuban neighborhood, Cuban battle. And it still is. There's a lot of Cuban coffee shops and bake shops. You'll notice when we get a little bit closer in. Cuban coffee is a lot stronger than American coffee. If you like coffee, try it. We serve it in little cups about this big. Very sweet with cane sugar. We call it a buche. It's a little mouthful. Have it with steamed milk. Of course, I call it café con leche. There was a gentleman named Eduardo Gatto that owned at one time most of this land, and he and his wife Mercedes, that was her name, returned to Cuba in 1921. He gave his house and a large parcel of land to the city of Key West. Key West wanted the land for the park. They had no use for a house, so they were going to tear it down, and Mr. Gatto said, "Don't bother, I'll move it." He did. It took 200 men and 2 mules 2 weeks to move his home, and it became a hospital called the Mercedes Gatto Hospital. And it remained a hospital until 1971. Today it's an apartment house. I mention it because it'll be coming up on your left-hand side. I mentioned it twice because when it was a hospital, well, I'm the only person in the company that can still tell you this. I was born in this hospital. The year's none of your business, but it was long before 1971. Mr. Gatto's house at the hospital is right here on the left. Like I said, today it's an apartment house. Now I told you it took 200 men and 2 mules 2 weeks to move it. Well, its original location is coming up ahead of us. The land that the Key West wanted for the park, they did turn it into Bayview Park here on the left. Mr. Gatto, this was part of his land, and his house was in the middle of the park. Bayview is the largest park on the island, and they call it Bayview because at one time, Mr. Gatto's house in this park was on the bay. When we get up here, you see it's no longer the case. The island today is 4.5 by 1.5 miles, almost a 2x4. Now it's twice as large today as it was in 1850. The reason it got twice as big is because in the 1930s the military did extensive dredging around the channels of Key West, deepening those channels for their ships. The island's never going to get any larger because that type of deep water dredging won't be done any longer. We know it's environmentally unsound. But the material they brought up is called marl. It's basically fossilized limestone and sand. But it gets hard as concrete. Millions of square yards was laid off directly ahead of the train, and all that land ahead of us is man-made.